Hello everyone. Today we're going to discuss a rather complex topic, and it's another way to explain the kind of reality we are in. There are many videos on the internet that try to address these kind of questions, whether we're in a simulation, a form of matrix, is reality really what it is, how to get out of it, and I'm going to try to clarify these points. Of course, the story and the model of the universe can be told from different perspectives, and here I'm going to use one way to explain it. So the first question that everybody asks is, what is really reality? And I have to start with using metaphors and images to explain this. Starting with science, basic science, and going deeper and deeper until we deconstruct all of this. So imagine you're looking at a storm on a coastline. All of these elements here, whether it's the water, or whether it's the air, whether it's the rock, all of them are composed of the same elementary particles and elements. All of them contain atoms, all of them contain molecules, all of them contain subatomic particles. So let's imagine for a moment that you could see at the level of subparticles. That would be your brain, instead of generating this image for you from this scene, you could actually see the subparticles, and that is what the reality would look like. Just like when you put on, some of these goggles that let you see infrared. Basically, you see reality in a completely different way once you put those goggles on. So imagine if you could see with subparticles. And if you could see subparticles, then this scene would disappear. Why? Because each of these elements contains the exact same subparticles. You have electrons, protons, neutrons, and they are inside each and every single molecule, each and every single atom that is composed of this scene. So this scene would just it would make no sense, absolutely no sense. It would just be little balls that are tossing around, and you could say that here there's a little bit more density because it's the rock and it's a little bit less mobile, and here there's a lot of movement, and here as well, maybe the air, there's a lot of wind. But essentially the very concept of the storm would disappear. You wouldn't be able, and if another storm would occur the next day, you wouldn't be able to see any resemblance between those two events. You wouldn't be able to categorize them. So reality would completely disappear as it stands. It's not even sure whether you'd be able to tell where your body ends and where the rest of reality starts. Because again, your body is also made of electrons, protons, neutrons. And so it would be very difficult to tell where your body starts and where it ends. But now let's just delve a little deeper, because this is still, you could say that this is still part of the matrix. Nikola Tesla said that everything is just vibration, energy, which is one and the same thing actually, because if you take a wave, any wave, it contains at the same time energy and information. Just simply look at any radio wave, any music file, and you'll see that it contains the waveform, which is energy once it's played through the speakers, and also information, the information of the actual music you're hearing. So in the end, if you really dig deeper and deeper and deeper, and you deconstruct all of these electrons, protons, neutrons, what you'll find is that all that's left is vibration and energy. So pure information, pure energy. And if then you follow more esoteric teachings where you say that we're all just one, we're all source, then you could say that reality is just one huge energy field. Energy field, which you give a form to based on, your interface. So reality is just, and this is the important part, an interface. Perhaps, and each element in this has its own interface. For instance, if you're a bat, your interface with reality is completely different from ours. They don't really see anything. They use, this sonar or whatever, where they wait for a wave to come back to them, by emitting sounds, and then they model reality based on this. So their interaction with reality also depends on what your perceived interface is. But where does this interface come from? Why do we see reality the way we see it? Why don't we see it as a bat or whatever? And you could say that the interface is, it was created with the same evolutionary principle as anything else. That is, it appeared gradually as a way to easily interact with pure energy and vibration. And here I'll have to use metaphors to explain how this works. The best metaphor is to use the analogy of a computer. And here we enter into the simulation theory folks, like Nick Bostrom, which says that basically, since we are about to develop a quantum computer, then which will be able to simulate realities from the inside, virtual worlds, then it makes sense to think that this reality is also a simulation. But I'll explain why this is a bit wrong. First of all, if you use this argument, then whatever reality we think is used as the basis to create ours can also be a simulation. And so you have a sort of a fractal of simulations nested in one inside of each other until infinity, which actually may be accurate. You could say that the universe is just a simulation of a simulation of a simulation of a simulation. So there's no real way out. And that's simply because of infinity. And you cannot put infinity in a box. But it's a bit more tricky than this. Why do I use the metaphor of a computer? Because it's the same principle as the reason why we have an interface like Windows or Mac OS or Linux on our computers is because imagine if you'd have to interact with your computer with just zeros and ones. You do agree that all that's real inside the computer is just zeros and ones. That's all that's real. Just like in our reality, all that's real is pure energy, which is, you can even say this formless, it's just pure potential. And maybe information perhaps, but that's not even sure. Perhaps all that really exists is just pure energy and pure potential, and then we give a form to this pure energy, pure potential based on the interface that we have developed. And of course, it makes sense to create these kind of building blocks, of reality, like atoms, molecules, because it's just a way to organize pure potential and pure energy in a way that's kind of logical and rational. And that is exactly what your interface on your computer is for. If you have zeros and ones, you can create everything and anything with zeros and ones. But nobody understands this. It's impossible. I mean, you could fry the circuits of your computer if you were allowed access to zeros and ones. You could make your graphics card turns backwards. You could overclock your processor 1,000,000%. I mean, there's just no limit to what you could do if you could interact with just zeros and ones. But just imagine the nightmare if your computer screen would display just zeros and ones, and you would have a keyboard where you would just have a 0 and a 1, and that's it. I mean, I think most people would go mad within a fraction of a second. And by the same token, if you could really see reality as it is, as pure energy and pure potential, then you would cease to exist. Just like a drop of water would lose all sense of boundaries once it enters into the ocean. So what I'm trying to say here is that the reason why we are in a simulation or matrix is for a good reason. It's kind of pointless to try to exit the simulation or matrix because you'd just be lost in infinity. And that's really important to understand. You'd be lost in pure energy, pure potential, pure everything, because you could actually give this any shape or form. It's infinity. So it can take any shape or form, just like with zeros and ones. You can build whatever you want to display on your screen. But is it going to be any more satisfying than what we have? That's really, it's arguable. So basically all of these building blocks that I was talking about, they are the same thing as what we call higher level languages in computer jargon. So it's just basically, you have the zeros and ones, and then on top of that you create like the BIOS and the motherboard, and then on top of that you have your hardware, just sound and sound card, video card, and they have their own software. Then you have your operating system, and inside your operating system you have programs. And when you actually program, you don't program with zeros and ones, you program with higher level languages. And that's what this is. You could say that whenever you build an object, for instance, you build a hammer or you build a knife, what you're doing is you're using a computer language, and which allows you to code with atoms and molecules, for instance. But you don't have access to pure energy and pure potential, because otherwise you could do anything. So in practical terms, how does this apply to us? There are many things to say about how reality works in reality. So the first big puzzle is science is still clueless as to explain how things move. When they're still in the interface, like they would say atoms and whatnot, they would say, well, yes, there's a lot of physics, and there's gravity and all these things. But then when you're at the Planck scale, and you have Planck units of space, which, they say is like this little grid, they say, the current theory is that an atom basically disappears from one unit of space and then appears in another one. It just pops into existence, and then it disappears again and it appears in another one as it moves. But that's just a theory. It's impossible to prove, and it's just very convenient to say that that's how it works. It's basically just an explanation to fill in the gap, because they have actually no clue how an atom sort of keeps its form and moves across distinct units of Planck space. They have no idea. So when you move a finger, for instance, what really happens? In our understanding, current understanding, what we think happens is first you have your brain sends a signal through your nervous system down to your finger, and then it moves. But then your finger is composed of cells, so it's almost as if the finger asks the cells to move, and then the cells are composed of molecules, and so it's as if the cells ask the molecules to move, and the molecules are composed of atoms, and so the molecules ask the atoms to move, and the atoms are made of subparticles. And you can see that it's almost as if you had layers or brains nested one inside the other. It's almost like if you're sending information down from the operating system or a program down to, like the motherboard, and then it goes back up and it updates the interface. But I would say it's the opposite that happens. It's the opposite. What I think, the way that this works, why is this screen going dark? Okay. The way that I think this happens is that your brain, which is made of pure vibrations, pure energy, it sends a thought, your intention. Your intention, your thought, as a vibration. And that vibration is picked up instantly by pure energy, inside the field of pure energy. And it checks first whether there's a compatibility or a consensus between all of the vibrations, all vibrations. So it's you're sending a thought, an intention. Your neighbor is sending a thought, an intention. Every single object in your reality is sending a thought or an intention as to what the next frame should be. What is the future, let's say. And if there's a consensus, then this pure energy takes whatever shape or form your thought has commanded it to take. And so it updates all of these layers moving upwards. The pure energy is then molded into what I believe is photons, is the most essential building block of the universe. And then the photons are molded into not even subparticles, but the particles below that, like quarks and stuff. And then the quarks are molded into subparticles, and the subparticles into atoms, and the atoms into molecules, and the molecules into cells, and the cells into your finger. And then your brain basically just updates its perception of reality and sees your finger move when in fact it has just materialized instantly. It has teleported itself in the future, and you can hallucinate it moving forward. That is probably the way that it works, because I just cannot see how else this could work, given this big problem of how you can even explain that at the Planck scale things move. What is much more likely is that all you have is always pure energy, pure potential for anything to happen at any point in time, and it is your consciousness, your thought, that gives that pure energy a shape, and it is a thought that has to it's kind of we're in a universe where you have consensus reality, which means that it's all thoughts combined that reverberate into this pure energy field, and which manifest everything. So you could say that your thoughts are shaping the entire universe, and whatever changes you've made to the universe will only occur if there's a consensus between everything. And of course you could say, well, that's bullshit, because I mean, if I am alone in my bathroom and I want to materialize an object, nobody's there to break the consensus. But you're never alone. Every single object in that bathroom, every single microbe, every single bacteria is also doing that kind of thing, is also projecting itself in the future and voting on what the next future should be. So here I'll use this saying, as within, so without, which is very useful, because we tend to materialize things on the outside of how it works on the inside. Or in other words, we tend to materialize on the outside representations of how the universe works from within. For instance, what did I just describe in this whole thing? What is this? Have you heard of blockchain? Don't you find it very similar to this idea of a consensus reality between all logic layers of the universe? And of course, the blockchain, whatever the blockchain is the reality, and you can add blocks, which is basically different frames in time. You can add blocks to this blockchain, and you obviously you can check this into the past, see if it all checks out. You can check history, you can check whatever. So it's almost like a blockchain which builds itself from the ground up at every single point in time, and you vote on what the next block of reality should look like. And you have, of course, the voting power is distributed so that humans have a certain voting power. I'd say pretty darn big, because if you look at how much we can influence reality, it's pretty impressive. And then animals have a certain voting power, and then insects, bacteria, plants, minerals, etc. into infinity. I mean, into the smallest building block in the universe. So it's pretty freaking complex if you think about it. And there has to always be a consensus between all of these. And understand that you can kind of force reality to do things to your liking. We have pretty much a lot of power. Think about this the next time you do this. Whenever you pick up, for instance, a glass of water, what actually happens when you take your hand and you lift that glass of water up? Don't forget that that glass of water, until you've touched it, it's voting in a pretty stable manner that it should stay there and abide by the laws of gravity and all that stuff. And the moment you touch it to pick it up, you can override, plenty of these rules, gravity and all kinds of things. So basically, you have a certain amount of impact on all of these layers, and the amount of power you have is again very well thought through. It's an evolutionary process again. Why don't we have the power to materialize, for instance, whatever we want with our thoughts? Well, think about it. How long do you think it would take that some random idiot, thought of the most deadliest weapon ever and, blowed this whole reality into pieces? How long? Probably not very long. So that power will never make it. It'll never materialize until we've reached a level of consciousness which allows us not to completely destroy this whole consensus reality. It's the same as, why don't we have programs that allow you to run your computer backwards or overclock your CPU to 1,000,000%? Well, because you'd fry the freaking computer. So the only reason why we have the interface that we have, why we have the body that we have, why we have the power to influence reality the way we have, is because it's already at the breaking point, because we're doing so much stupid things with our planet and with our environment. But it's a pretty good balance, I would say. So again, when you pick up a glass of water with your hand, that action, it's more a symbolic representation of what's happening. But what's really true is that your hand is like your mouse and your keyboard, and it represents a physical representation of your psychic powers. So you're never really picking anything up. Understand that if you look at this from the point of view of atoms, for instance, you never touch anything, physically speaking. When you grab that glass of water, the last atom on the tip of your finger and the first atom on the glass, the relative distance and the void that's between them is the same as between our star and some, our sun and some remote star somewhere a few light years away. That is how far these atoms are apart. And yet you see that you can pick up that glass. How can you explain that? And again, it's the only way to explain it is that all of this is an interface, and your hand just is like a visual helper for you to be able to use psychic power and just mold pure energy to your liking, to give it whatever shape or form you want. And so what's the conclusion of all of this? Well, first of all, that there's nothing outside of this simulation. Whatever we need to do is just update or upgrade our interface in a responsible way to do more things. Whenever we use an object like a car or whatever, all of these is also, it's like installing a program inside the interface which allows you to change what you're seeing. Like a car allows you to move in the interface faster. That's all it is. It doesn't really exist. What exists is just, again, is a program that allows you to do something, manipulate the interface in a certain way. So when we consider what is true, for instance, is Linux the truth? Is Windows the truth? Is Mac OS the truth? That's a pointless question. The more important question is, what does the interface allow us to do? Whenever you hear somebody channeling an ET or talking with spirits, it's the same as if they have moved on from Windows 95 to, say, Windows 10. Or even switched to Linux or something. They have updated their interface to allow to interact with a bigger part of infinity. Pure energy, that of course that's part of this pure potential and pure infinite energy. It's like we're bridging the gap between two different interfaces. And so again, I've represented reality as a sort of a blockchain, and so let me just draw something else. Just assume that reality is like a network. A network where all of these nodes are individual parts of this reality, like atoms, like cells, like humans. And we each have our own interface to sort of vote inside this network on what we want the reality to be, to look like. How do we want to shape infinity? How do we want to shape pure energy? But let's assume that some nodes on this network are running Windows 10, and you're still running, here as a human, you're still running MS-DOS. Do you think those two can communicate? Well, somebody running Windows 10 could probably send a few signals if they wanted to. Retrocompatibility, you could call it. And just a few little commands and hints. But you in your MS-DOS, you'd have really a hard time not only to perceive whatever Windows 10 is sending you, but even to see it, because you're still with a command line. How much different do you think a command line looks than the Windows 10 interface? So when you're interacting with ETs and spirits and ascended masters, Jesus, whatever, just imagine that it's as if Jesus was one of those nodes, and suddenly he jumped to a completely different interface. He updated his interface so radically that it almost severed the links with other nodes, and he found himself on a completely different network. So that's what raising your consciousness actually means, if you wanna use this computer metaphor, which I find really useful. It's just like updating to another version of the operating system, and it allows you to perceive a new reality, that is a new interface. And it may sever the links between you and some others. This idea of old Earth versus new Earth. Ultimately, all we're doing is updating the interface. And how it should be updated is again a question of evolution. And it has to be a responsible thing. You cannot just update irresponsibly and then break the whole network. So whenever people are channeling these higher beings, it's just like connecting to another part of an infinitely big network, and slowly updating your interface to be compatible with theirs. And so opening up your network to stuff that's outside. I'm wondering if I covered everything I wanted to say. I think it's already long enough, but I hope you get the point. The idea again is not to break or to break out of the simulation. Actually, it's not the point, because you're at the same time the computer, the hardware, and the software. You're both. And you could say that this is like pure consciousness. Pure consciousness that molds pure energy. And I guess it's more fun to do it as a collective, because just think of your dreams, for instance. In your dreams, it gives you a sort of a hint as to what a reality where you as a node would disconnect completely from the network and just be one isolated node with whatever program you have, like Windows 10. But you could do whatever the hell you want. You wouldn't have to ask for consensus or permission. Well, in your dreams, you can do whatever the hell you want. It's so chaotic. It's so chaotic. You jump from one scene to another. There's sometimes no coherence. I mean, imagine if reality was like your dreams. It would be a nightmare. And I think after a while, you'd quickly want to come back, because nothing would make sense. You could even do whatever the hell you want at every single point in time. Screw as many women as you want, be as rich as you want. You just think it and it happens. And I think you'd go crazy in less than a few hours, to be honest. And I've already witness certain clairvoyant people that have tried this and experienced this. It's lucid dreams, but on a higher level, where it's so lucid that it's on another level. It's as real as reality. And while this consensus reality might be sort of painful and frustrating, what we can build as a network is so much more interesting, so much more stable, so much more, it's just like, it's a collective effort, and the result is well, you get plenty of benefits from this. The fact that time, kind of linear time, exists, the fact that you build gradually new interactions, new possible reinteractions with reality. It's just so thrilling. So let's think of a way to update and upgrade our reality in a responsible way. I guess that's my final words. That's what we're trying to do here. And we're getting some help, of course, from people outside the network that have updated the interface already, and that are sending us signals and ideas on how to break the barriers between our networks.